Hi, everyone. So, we're going to carry on today with the murder at the Vicarage, our mystery story. And as we read so far, Colonel Prothero has been discovered murdered, and he died at the Vicarage in suspicious circumstances. He's been shot, and he was sitting at the vicar's desk, and the clock was knocked over, and it was stopped at exactly 6:22. Except they found out that the clock is always running ahead because the vicar's always late. So he's trying to keep his clock ahead of schedule to keep himself on track. So well, this doesn't make any sense because he couldn't have died at 6:22 because it wasn't actually 6:22. It was way earlier than that when the clock stopped. It's tricky. So in chapter 7, we're going to find out what happens. Colonel Melchett is a dapper little man with a habit of snorting suddenly and unexpectedly. He has red hair and rather keen, bright blue eyes. "Good morning, Vicar," he said. "Nasty business, eh?" "Poor old Prothero. Not that I liked him. I didn't. Nobody did, for that matter. It's a nasty bit of work for you, too. Hope it hasn't upset your missus." I said Griselda had taken it very well. "That's lucky. Rotten thing to happen in one's house. I must say, I'm surprised at young Redding, doing it the way he did. No sort of consideration for anyone's feelings." A wild desire to laugh came over me, but Colonel Melchett evidently saw nothing odd in the idea of a murderer being considerate, so I held my peace. "I must say, I was rather taken aback when I heard the fellow had marched in and given himself up," continued Colonel Melchett, dropping into a chair. "How did it happen exactly?" "Last night, about 10 o'clock, the fellow rolls in, throws down his pistol, and says, 'Here I am.' I did it. Just like that." "But what account does he give of the business?" "Precious little. He was warned, of course, about making a statement, but he merely laughed. Said he came here to see you, found Prothero here, they had words, and he shot him. Won't say what the quarrel was about. Look here, Clement, just between you and me. Do you know anything about it? I've heard rumors about his being forbidden in the house and all that. What was it? Did he seduce his daughter or what? We don't want to bring the girl into it more than we can help, but for everybody's sake, I just want to know, what was the trouble?" "No," I said, "you can take it from me that it was something quite different. But I can't say more at the present juncture." He nodded and rose. "Well, I'm glad to know. There's a lot of talk. Too many women in this part of the world. Well, I must get along. I've got to see Haydock. He was called out to the case, and he ought to be back by now. But I don't mind telling you I'm sorry about Redding. He always struck me as a decent chap. Decent young chap. Perhaps they'll think out some kind of defense for him. After effects of the war, shell shock, something. Especially if no very adequate motive turns up. I must be off. Like to come along?" I said I would like to very much, and we went out together. Haydock's house is next door to mine. His servant said the doctor had just come in and showed us into the dining room, where Haydock was sitting down to a steaming plate of eggs and bacon. He greeted us with an amiable nod. "Sorry I had to go out," he said. "Confinement case. I've been up most of the night over your business, though. And I've got a bullet for you." He shoved a little box along the table. Melchett examined it. 25? Haydock nodded. "I'll keep the technical details for the inquest," he said. "All you want to know is that death was practically instantaneous. Silly young fool. What did he want to go and do it for? Amazing, by the way, that nobody heard the shot." "Yes," said Melchett. "That surprises me." "The kitchen window gives on the other side of the house," I said. "With the study door, the pantry door, and the kitchen door all shut, I doubt if you would hear anything, and there was no one but the maid in the house." Said Melchett. "It's odd all the same. I wonder, the old lady, what's her name? Marple? She didn't hear it? The study window was open." "Oh, perhaps she did," said Haydock. "I don't think she did," I said. "She was over at the vicarage just now, and she didn't mention anything of the kind, which I'm certain she would have done if there had been anything to tell. May have heard it and paid no attention to it. Thought it was a car backfiring. It struck me that Haydock was looking much more jovial and good-humored this morning. He seemed like a man who was decorously trying to subdue unusually good spirits. Well, what about a silencer? He added. That's quite likely. Nobody would hear anything then. Melchett shook his head. Slack didn't find anything of the kind, and he asked Redding. And Redding didn't seem to know what he was talking about at first, and then he denied point blank using anything of the kind. And I suppose one can take his word for it. Yes, indeed. Poor devil. Damned young fool, said Colonel Melchett. I'm sorry, Clement, but really he is. Somehow, one can't get used to thinking of him as a murderer. Any motive? Asked Haydock, taking a final draught of coffee and pushing back his chair. He says they quarreled and that he lost his temper and then he shot him. Hoping for manslaughter, huh? The doctor shook his head. That story doesn't hold water. He stole up behind him as he was writing and shot him through the head. Precious little quarrel about that. Anyway, there wouldn't have been time for a quarrel, I said, remembering Miss Marple's words. To creep up, shoot him, alter the clock hands back to 6:22, and leave again would have taken him all his time. I shall never forget his face when I met him outside the gate, or the way he said, You want to see Prothero? Oh, you'll see him all right. That in itself ought to have made me suspicious of what had just taken place a few minutes before. Haydock stared at me. What do you mean, what had just taken place? When do you think Redding shot him? A few minutes before I got to the house. The doctor shook his head. Impossible, plumb impossible. He'd been dead much longer than that. But my dear young man, cried Colonel Melchett, you said yourself that half an hour was only an approximate estimate. Half an hour, 35 minutes, 25 minutes, 20 minutes possibly, but no less. No. Why, the body would have been warm when I got to it. We stared at each other. Haydock's face had changed. It had gone suddenly gray and old. I wondered at the change in him. But look here, Haydock, the colonel found his voice. If Redding admits shooting him at 6:45, Haydock sprang to his feet. I tell you, that's impossible, he roared. If Redding says he killed Prothero at 6:45, Redding is lying. Hang it all, I tell you, I'm a doctor and I know this. The blood had begun to congeal. If Redding is lying, began Melchett. He stopped and shook his head. We'd better go down to the police station and see him. And that's the end of chapter 7. Bye, guys.